Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the murder at the Red Lantern Hotel. The night had no business being as quiet as it was. Manhattan usually manages some racket to leak through the windows of West 35th Street, but that evening the fog had rolled in heavy and settled against the glass like a tired lodger. The lamplight in Wolfe's office burned steady, yellow against the dark, and the smell of Fritz's late-night stock simmering in the kitchen just managed to reach me as I set foot inside. I'd spent the better part of the evening on errands Wolfe considered beneath his dignity but essential to our solvency, and I was ready to trade my hat for a glass of milk. Before I had the chance, the telephone rang. The clock on my desk read 5 minutes past 11. Calls at that hour have a way of making the hairs on the back of my neck stiffen. Wolfe, of course, was in his chair with eyes half closed, pretending that the pages of Montaigne before him had not already been read a dozen times. He gave no sign he intended to move. I crossed the room and lifted the receiver. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. What came over the line was not a voice I recognized. It was a woman, breath fast, as if she had been hurrying through smoke. "Please, Mr. Wolfe, I must speak to him at once. It cannot wait until morning." I kept my tone easy. "That depends, miss. He isn't in the habit of receiving callers after hours, especially ones he hasn't met." "You must tell him," she pressed, "that I am in danger. Tonight. If I remain here, I may be killed." That got my attention. "Where are you calling from?" "The Red Lantern Hotel." She nearly whispered it, but the words carried sharp as broken glass. "Room 312, please ask him. I will pay anything. It must be tonight." I turned my head toward Wolfe. He had not moved, but I caught the flick of his eyelids. I covered the mouthpiece. "A lady in distress, boss. Says she'll be murdered before morning if you don't see her." He snorted, not lifting his eyes. "Phooey. If she has reached so late an hour to seek help, she has already squandered her resource." I returned to the line. "He's not in a hospitable mood, miss, but perhaps if you give me your name—" "No." The word was desperate. "I cannot. If you knew it, you would not see me either. But I beg you, persuade him. Only one night. Please." Her breath rattled close to the receiver. I heard a door open somewhere behind her, the hush of a corridor. She gasped, muffled the receiver with her hand, and for several seconds there was nothing but the hum of the line. "Miss?" I prompted. She came back, lower, trembling. "I should not have called, but if I die tonight, tell him he refused me." The line clicked, and the hum flattened into silence. I replaced the receiver slowly. Wolfe closed Montaigne, laid it neatly on the table, and lifted his glass of beer. The amber caught the lamplight. He sipped, grimaced faintly, and set the glass down. "She has already lost her wager with fate." That's a neat line for the epitaph, but it leaves us holding nothing but a dead connection. I leaned on the desk. "Do we ignore it, or shall I make myself useful?" "You will make yourself useful by permitting me to digest. It is past 11. No business requiring my judgment is admitted after dinner." She sounded like business that won't keep until breakfast. He waved a hand, heavy and final. "Then it will not reach breakfast." I went to my chair, though my nerves had no intention of settling. The office had its usual stillness. Wolfe in his yellow chair, the wall of books indifferent, the orchids asleep upstairs. Yet the memory of that voice dragged against the quiet. She had been more than frightened. She had been cornered. Wolfe closed his eyes, fingers steepled across his waistcoat. He was done for the night. I knew the posture. Getting him to stir now would require dynamite, or Inspector Kramer with a squad of men battering down the door. Since neither was present, the decision fell to me. I crossed to the window. Fog smothered the streetlights, leaving only faint halos. A cab wheezed past, swallowed again in grey. Somewhere a horn called once and died. If the Red Lantern Hotel was harbouring a woman afraid to breathe, the city was doing its best to muffle her cries. I turned back. She mentioned room 312. That's the kind of detail a scared liar doesn't usually improvise. Should I head over, at least to check whether she's pulling our leg? No. His eyes opened a fraction. If she is truthful, she is already imperiled. If she is not, you will squander the night. Either way, nothing obliges me to abandon my rules for a hysteric. She might end up on a slab. Many do, he said dryly. If you hunger for a corpse, Archie, tomorrow's newspaper will provide one without the expense of a taxi. It was no use. The man was bedrock. I let it drop, though unease twisted my stomach. I busied myself with paperwork, invoices and carbon copies, anything to keep my hands from tapping out the impatience I felt. The clock nudged midnight. Wolfe shifted only to summon Fritz for a final word about breakfast. The clink of crockery below drifted up, and I realized I hadn't had that glass of milk after all. The phone sat mutely on the desk, receiver snug in its cradle, as if it had not just whispered a threat of murder into the room. Wolfe stood slowly, with all the ceremony of a monarch ending an audience, and moved toward the hall. "Good night, Archie. See that we are not disturbed before 9. "Yes, sir." I kept my voice even. His tread carried up the stairs, deliberate, and the house settled back into its habitual silence. I remained in the office, lamplight throwing my shadow across the desk, and considered the wisdom of defying him. A quick trip to the Red Lantern might confirm whether we had been toyed with, but if I left without orders and Wolfe learned it, I would spend the next week dodging his displeasure. No light chore when you live under the same roof. Still, I had heard the fear in her voice. That wasn't stage work. The Red Lantern Hotel was not one of the city's grand establishments, but it was notorious enough for trysts, debtors, and men who preferred to register under borrowed names. If she was hiding there, she was hiding from someone with teeth. I checked the phone again. No dial tone lingered from her end, only the usual hum. Whoever she was, she had hung up clean. The fog outside pressed heavier. The hour pressed too. I shut the window curtains, pulled the last file toward me, and told myself the smart play was patience. Morning would bring news, one way or another. The only sound was the steady tick of the office clock and the faint hum of the city breathing through its fog. Morning began the way it always did in the brownstone, with Fritz moving quietly in the kitchen and the air faintly touched by coffee and butter. Wolfe was still upstairs having his breakfast on a tray, and I had my own simpler one at my desk, a glass of milk, a slice of toast, and the first edition of the Gazette. The front page did its job of slapping me awake. The headline stretched across 4 columns: "Woman strangled in hotel room, police probe robbery motive." The words beneath spelled out the details, and with every line the chill in my stomach grew. The victim was young, identity withheld, found strangled in room 312 of the Red Lantern Hotel. A maid discovered her around 7 that morning. The story added that Inspector Kramer had given a brief statement. Robbery gone wrong, no suspects in custody. The reporter emphasized the absence of forced entry and the fact that the woman's purse lay emptied on the carpet. I didn't need the description buried in the 3rd paragraph to know who she was. 22 years old, brown hair, medium height, checked into the hotel under a false name. That was the woman whose voice had cracked across our line the night before. I folded the paper tight, rose, and went to the door of the dining room where Wolfe had just descended. He was already buttoned into his brown silk house jacket and moving with his usual gravity, the look of a man expecting civilization to behave according to his timetable. He caught my face, then the folded Gazette in my hand, and scowled. "If it is politics, Archie, spare me until lunch." "It's not politics. It's murder." I handed him the paper. He read with his head bowed slightly, lips pressed into a line. When he reached Kramer's statement about robbery, he gave a sound halfway between a grunt and a laugh. "Robbery," he said, and lowered himself into the yellow chair. "Imbecility. The belongings left scattered, no forced entry. A stage prop for the credulous." "Kramer's theory," I said, "isn't built for our approval." "Kramer's theory," Wolfe replied, "is built for haste. The public requires a name, a motive, a story to hold its coffee down. Truth can wait." He set the paper aside. "Do not gape at me. Yes, it is the same woman. She called here, and now she is dead." "That makes me responsible." "Phooey. She was responsible for her own folly. She sought aid too late. She perished. That is the sum." "Not for me it isn't." I spoke to her. I promised nothing, but she expected something. If I don't go down there and see the room with my own eyes, I'll be carrying her ghost around my neck. He shut his eyes as though my words were a small stone thrown against a fortress wall. "And what do you expect to find? The police will have trampled every inch. They will leave crumbs and scraps, not evidence." Sometimes crumbs are enough. I kept my voice steady. You've said it yourself. The smallest trace can be the hinge of a case. If she came to us, even by telephone, we're already in it. Unless you want Kramer to put it about that Wolfe declined a plea for help and the girl wound up strangled. That last line landed. His eyes opened, heavy and slow, and fixed me. You would use gossip as leverage. I'd use anything that gets me to the lantern before the trail is cold. The silence stretched. Wolfe tapped one finger against the chair arm. Fritz entered quietly with a tray of rolls and butter, set it on the side table, and vanished again without a word. Wolfe took a roll, tore it, and chewed while considering. When he swallowed, he gave a curt nod. Very well. Go. You will observe, you will note, and you will not blunder. Do not expect me to stir a finger until you return with more than melodrama. I took that as license enough. 10 minutes later I was on the street, hat pulled low against the fog. Cabs were scarce at that hour, but I caught one on 8th Avenue and gave the driver the address of the Red Lantern. The Lantern sat 2 blocks off Broadway, a brick and plaster pile with ideas above its station. Its sign, a red globe glowing faintly in the daylight haze, swung on chains above the entrance. I paid the driver, stepped onto the curb, and took in the scene. Uniformed men loitered by the door, reporters pressed against the cordon, and a knot of gawkers craned for a glimpse of scandal. Inside, the lobby reeked of stale smoke and carpet dust. The desk clerk had the practiced calm of a man who had seen worse and knew how to look indifferent. He glanced up as I approached, his eye flicking to the notebook in my pocket and the stance that says detective even without a badge. We're closed to visitors, he muttered. I'm not here for a room. I leaned on the counter. Name's Archie Goodwin. I'm here to look at 312. He started to shake his head, but a detective in plain clothes near the elevator caught the exchange and came over. He was a burly fellow with a jaw like quarried stone. Goodwin, huh? That means Wolfe's interested. Figures. Always nosing in. I'm nosing, sure, I said, but with a purpose. The girl called our office last night before she was killed. I need to see where she died. The detective considered, then shrugged. Kramer won't like it, but he can growl later. Come along. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor, a creaking cage that rattled like bones. The corridor smelled of disinfectant and the faint sourness of fear. Room 312 had its door propped open, a uniformed officer standing guard. Inside, the air still carried the impression of violence, though the body had been removed hours before. The bedspread was rumpled, one pillow dropped to the floor. A handbag lay open, contents scattered, lipstick, a compact, a key, a handful of coins. The drawers were pulled half open as if someone had gone through them with hurried hands. On the carpet near the bed I saw the faint scuff where heels had dragged. Strangled with a cord, the detective said. She fought, but not long. Purse emptied. Kramer says robbery, simple as that. I crouched by the handbag. The coins had rolled close to the radiator, but none were taken. Funny kind of robbery where you leave the change, he grunted. Don't ask me. I don't write the headlines. I studied the window. Closed, latch secure, no sign of tampering. Whoever killed her had come in with a key or with trust. The chambermaid had found her, according to the paper. I made a mental note to ask her what she had seen before opening that door. The detective watched me. Well, got any magic Wolfe tricks up your sleeve? No tricks, just questions. Did the register give her real name? Fake, Alice Gray, no such address. Place like this, nobody looks close. I stood, brushing dust from my knee. Then someone wanted her under a mask. Whoever she was, she knew enough to make enemies, and she thought Wolfe could help her. That right? He said. Well, too late now. Too late for her, I said, maybe not for us. I took one last look at the room. The disorder was too deliberate, like scenery arranged to satisfy a reporter. A woman calls, terrified, says she will be killed. 12 hours later she is dead, purse spilled for show, window locked. Robbery? Kramer could sell that to the Gazette, but Wolfe would never buy it. I left the room, the detective trailing behind. In the corridor, a chambermaid waited on a bench, wringing her hands. She was pale, young, and looked as if she had already answered more questions than she could bear. I caught her eye, gave her a nod, but didn't press. That would come later. Back on the street, the fog had begun to thin, revealing the bustle of traffic and newsboys shouting the headline I had already read. I bought another copy anyway, more for the habit than the content, and tucked it under my arm. The cab ride back gave me time to think, the girl's voice on the line, trembling, insistent, her refusal to give a name, the cut-off gasp as if someone had opened a door behind her. Now the body in room 312, strangled, purse scattered, no forced entry. When I stepped into the brownstone again, the house was filled with the scent of Fritz's preparations for lunch. Wolfe sat in his chair, eyes closed, but I knew he was not sleeping. He opened them as I entered and raised a brow. Well? She's real. She's dead. And robbery's a joke. Purse emptied but money untouched. Window latched. Whoever killed her was let in. He exhaled slowly. As I said, a prop. What else? Name on the register is fake, no address. And a chambermaid found her, but I haven't spoken with her yet. I will. The scene was already crowded, but I saw enough. Somebody wanted it neat, quick and tidy for the papers, too tidy. He steepled his fingers. So, we have a woman who feared death, who called us, who died as foretold. Kramer has his robbery. You have your conscience. I have my question. Which is? Who profits from this death? Not in theatrics, not in sentiment, but in substance. Until we know that, we have only fog. I met his gaze. Then I'll keep nosing until I find substance. She asked us, Wolfe. She trusted us. I can't leave it alone. He gave the smallest of nods, almost invisible. Go then. Bring me facts, not lamentations. That was all the permission I needed. The red lantern looked no better by daylight. Fog still clung low over the street, making the red globe above the entrance glow like a warning. I pushed through the revolving door into the lobby, which smelled of varnish layered over smoke and cheap perfume. The night had been hard on the place, and the staff wore it like stiff collars. The desk clerk, a man in his 40s with thinning hair and a nose polished by years of rubbing, looked up as I approached. His eyes darted left, then right, before fixing on me. He had the air of someone calculating what to tell and what to bury. You were on duty last night, I said. Tell me about the woman in 312. He adjusted his spectacles. She arrived late, alone. No baggage except a small case. Paid cash. Signed the register as Alice Gray. That is all I know. Alone, you're sure? Yes, alone. He spoke too quickly. I saw her step from the cab myself. Anybody meet her later? He shook his head. Not that I observed. The hotel is respectable, Mr. Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's office. I leaned on the counter. Respectable hotels don't generally end with strangled women in their rooms. Try again. Who came near her? His lips pressed thin. I told you. She arrived alone. I mind the desk. I don't spy on guests. I studied him a moment. His hands, flat on the counter, twitched once. Whatever he had seen, he had no appetite for sharing. I left him to his conscience and crossed to where the bellboy leaned against the wall near the elevator. The boy couldn't have been more than 18, wiry, with a cap set at a tilt and shoes that squeaked when he shifted. He straightened as I approached, eyes bright with nerves. You're the one carried her bag, I said. Yes, sir. A small case. Room 312. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. She tipped me a dime. Most don't. Did she say anything? Not much. Just asked the quickest way to the room. But later... He stopped, glanced toward the desk clerk and lowered his voice. Later I saw her in the corridor. She wasn't alone then. There was a man with her. What man? Tall grey overcoat, hat pulled low. They stood close, whispering. I didn't hear the words, but she looked scared, real scared. You're certain it was last night? Yes, sir, just before midnight. I was bringing ice up to 309. They didn't see me. That was something the desk clerk had neglected to mention. I thanked the boy, slipped him $1, and told him to keep his eyes sharp. His squeaky shoes echoed after me as I moved toward the service hall where a chambermaid waited, wringing her hands in her apron. She was young, no more than 20, with hair pinned hastily and eyes that darted like trapped birds. She rose as I approached, twisting the fabric between her fingers. You're the one who found her, I said gently. Her throat bobbed. Yes, sir, this morning. The door was not latched. I knocked, no answer. I opened and she was... She broke off, swallowing hard. I've read the papers. You don't need to describe it. What I want to know is what you heard before you opened that door. She glanced around, lowered her voice. Voices. Last night. Raised. I was in the hall with Linen, room 312, I'm sure. A woman, sharp, and a man, angry. I could not hear words, only the sound. It was late, nearly midnight. And you told the police? She nodded quickly. Yes, sir, they wrote it, but I don't know if they believed me. Her eyes brimmed, and I believed her. She had no reason to invent quarrels she wished she had never heard. I thanked her, promised nothing, and let her retreat down the hall with her apron still twisted tight. By the time I returned to the lobby, the clerk had buried himself in paperwork, face studiously blank. The bellboy busied himself with the elevator crank, and the chambermaid had vanished. The fog outside had thinned further, but the haze inside the lantern was thicker than smoke. I stepped back onto the street and hailed a cab. As we rattled uptown, I laid the notes in my pocket. Clark claims she arrived alone. Bellboy saw her whispering with a man in a grey overcoat. Chambermaid heard raised voices near midnight. 3 stories, 3 shades of truth, none of them matching. Back at the brownstone, the house smelled of Fritz's noon preparations. Onions, butter, something simmering low. I found Wolfe in the office, chair tilted back, fingers steepled as if the world owed him silence. His eyes opened a fraction as I entered. Well, he said. I gave him the account, each piece in order. He listened without interruption, though his brow deepened when I spoke of the overcoat. The clerk is a liar, he declared when I finished. The bellboy is a witness. The maid is an echo. None alone is sufficient. Together they make a chord. And the chord says what? That she was not alone. That someone confronted her. That she died as consequence. We require names. Names? The guests on that floor. We have fragments. A man in grey. A quarrel. I want the list entire. Who slept behind those doors while she fought for her life? He closed his eyes again, shutting out the daylight, the kitchen sounds, and even me. The conversation was finished. I pulled my notebook shut and slipped it into my pocket. The case had moved 1 step forward, though Wolfe would not move with it until pressed. That left the job to me, as usual. The Red Lantern's shadows had started to thin, but they still held enough to hide a killer. The Red Lantern's registry wasn't the sort of ledger that yielded names easily. It took an hour of patience, a little charm, and a $10 bill to persuade the assistant manager to loosen his grip. When he finally slid the list across the counter, his eyes flicked nervously toward the corridor, as if the mere act of lending me a glance at the guests' names would earn him a curse. I folded the sheet into my pocket and stepped outside, where the fog had thinned enough to let the sunlight make a pale effort at reaching the pavement. 4 names on the same floor as 312, 4 strangers who had heard or seen nothing according to their statements. But I have learned that strangers with nothing to say often have too much to hide. The list read, Morris Kendall, travelling jewellery salesman, Rita Dane, chorus girl, Henry Vance, importer, Paul Griscom, attorney. That gave me an itinerary. I began with Kendall, who was easy to find. He was in the lobby polishing his shoes with a rag that had seen better days. He was in his early 30s, face lean, nose sharp, and his suitcase beside him bore the scuffs of a dozen trains. He glanced up as I approached, measuring me in a glance the way men who sell valuables do. "Mr. Kendall?" I asked. "That's me. You buying?" His tone was brisk, automatic. "Not jewellery. I'm looking into the business upstairs. Room 312. His eyes narrowed, and he pressed the rag against the leather harder than necessary. "The murder, you mean? Nothing to do with me." "You were on the same floor." "So were others." He shrugged. "I was asleep. On the road all week. I turn in early. Didn't hear a thing." "Not even raised voices?" "No. Slept like a stone." He dropped the rag, folded the polished tin, and snapped his case shut. "Look, mister, I've got a train to catch this afternoon. If the police need me, they know where to find me." His words were neat, his tone firm, but his hand trembled slightly when he closed the clasp. A man accustomed to convincing buyers, yet uneasy when pressed. I noted it and moved on. The next stop was Rita Dane. She occupied a corner room, and the door opened after 3 knocks to reveal a woman with red hair pinned high, eyes lined dark, and a dressing gown in satin that had seen late nights. She leaned against the frame with one hand on her hip, appraising me with professional disinterest. "What's the line?" she asked. "If it's chorus jobs, I'm not interested." "Not hiring. Archie Goodwin, looking into the woman in 312. Her mouth tightened. Her. The papers are full of it. Poor kid. You knew her? I saw her. Passed her in the hall, that's all. I mind my own business. She talked to you? No. Rita's eyes flicked aside, then back. Listen, mister, I got enough troubles. I'm between shows. My room's paid until Friday, and after that I don't know. Don't tie me to this. Nobody's tying you. I only asked if she spoke. She didn't. She straightened, tugging the gown tighter. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to rehearse a number. The door closed firmly. Her denial came too fast, too polished, as though she had rehearsed it. But fear hung about her words. She had seen more than she admitted. Henry Vance was another matter. He had a suite rather than a single room, and his manner matched his wealth. When I called, a valet ushered me into a sitting room lined with heavy drapes and a faint scent of cigars that had been smoked elsewhere. Vance was a man in his 50s, silver hair neat, waistcoat immaculate, eyes cool behind rimless spectacles. Goodwin, you said? Wolfe's man? That's right. He inclined his head as though greeting an equal at a club. I heard of you. This is an unfortunate affair, but hardly my concern. I retired early last night. My business keeps me occupied during the day, not the small hours. You're an importer? Yes. Textiles, machinery, odds and ends. Nothing romantic, I assure you. You didn't hear anything from 312? Nothing. And if I had, I would hardly have gone snooping. A hotel affords privacy. One honours it. His voice was smooth, his manner confident, but there was something deliberate in the way he chose each phrase. Men who deal with contracts learn to fence with words. He was fencing now, though no blade had been drawn. Last on the list was Paul Griscom. I found him in the lounge, a thin man in a dark suit that hung too carefully, as if chosen to avoid remark. His tie was plain, his hair close-cropped, his eyes watchful behind small spectacles. He was nursing a glass of seltzer as though alcohol were beneath him. Mr. Griscom. He looked up, expression unreadable. Yes. Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's office. I'd like to ask about the woman in 312. His lips pressed together before he spoke. I know nothing about her. You were on the same floor. Many people were on the same floor. That does not imply acquaintance. Did you hear voices? See anyone? No. He set the glass down gently. And if I had, I would reserve my statements for the proper authorities. I smiled. Of course. I wouldn't dream of taking their place, but you don't mind me asking? I do mind. His eyes sharpened. Good day, Mr. Goodwin. That ended the interview. He rose, left his half-finished seltzer, and walked away with a precision that suggested withdrawal was his strongest suit. I'd collected 4 denials, each tidy, each carrying a whiff of evasion. Kendall claimed to sleep early, but his trembling hand said otherwise. Rita Dane pretended ignorance, though her eyes betrayed fear. Vance wrapped himself in dignity, but his careful words rang like armour. Griscom denied with an icy firmness that suggested knowledge locked tight. I returned to the brownstone with notes weighing heavier than the paper that held them. Wolfe was in his chair, orchids finished for the morning, lips pursed as he regarded the ceiling. Fritz brought lunch, pheasant pie, green salad, bread baked that morning, and withdrew without a sound. Wolfe gestured for my account. I laid it out, each conversation word for word. He listened with eyes half closed, head tilted, as if tuning to a symphony only he could hear. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose. 2 of them lied, he said. Which 2? Must I spoon-feed? Think. The salesman said he slept. Yet his profession requires late hours, bargaining, appointments. A man accustomed to trains and late arrivals does not collapse before midnight. Kendall, then? Yes, and the chorus girl. Her trade is performance, yet she feigned ignorance. She saw more than she admits. The other 2, Vance and Griscom, are equally suspect, but their lies are of omission, not commission. They craft words, not fabrications, different species. He reached for his glass of beer, sipped and set it down. Archie, you will secure more than words. I want corroboration. Find out where each of them claimed to be and with whom. Records, witnesses, anything solid. Words alone are smoke. I leaned back, considering the names. 4 doors along one corridor. 1 woman dead. One man in a grey overcoat whispered to her. A quarrel heard near midnight. Now 4 denials stack neat as cards. Wolfe was right. Smoke, but smoke rising from fire. Fine, I said. I'll keep tugging. Maybe one of them will trip. They will trip, Wolfe said calmly, because you will place the obstacle. Do so. The conversation ended, as always, with his command delivered in the tone of immutable law. I tucked my notes away. The Red Lantern's guests had shown their faces, and behind them shadows lengthened. Somewhere in those shadows lay the hand that had closed on the throat of the woman who called us. The bell rang at 10:03, sharp and insistent. I'd been at my desk with the Gazette spread out and a fresh glass of milk at hand, and Wolfe had been performing his daily ritual of leaning back with eyes half closed, digesting the previous course of Fritz's lunch. The sound of that bell carried more authority than a casual caller. I set the paper aside, crossed to the door, and opened it to find Inspector Kramer looming on the stoop. He was broad, jaw working furiously on the stub of a cigar that wasn't lit, and his eyes carried the storm of a man who had left headquarters in no mood for pleasantries. Without waiting for my invitation, he shouldered past me into the hall. "Where is he?" he barked. I shut the door and gestured toward the office. "Where he always is. You know the way." Kramer made for the door, shoes heavy on the carpet, and pushed inside. Wolfe looked up, impassive, as if the inspector were nothing more than a draught of air that had slipped through the cracks. He did not rise. He never did. "Good morning, Inspector," Wolfe said evenly. "I trust the police department continues to function despite your absence from it." "Cut it," Kramer growled. He advanced to the middle of the office, cigar clenched like a weapon. "What the devil do you think you're doing, poking your nose into the Red Lantern business?" Wolfe lifted his brows a fraction. "I am poking nowhere. I have remained precisely here. It is others who come, uninvited, bearing their troubles." Kramer's fist closed tighter around the cigar. "Don't play games with me. My men tell me your errand boy has been crawling around the hotel asking questions." He jerked his head at me. "That one. He's got no business in a police matter." I leaned back against the desk, arms folded. "If you're asking whether I've been diligent, I plead guilty." "You'll plead more than guilty if you keep it up," Kramer snapped. "Wolfe, this is official business. Stay out. If you interfere, I'll haul you down to Center Street myself." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to fix Kramer with the weight of a glacier. "Inspector, you may threaten to your heart's content, but the facts remain. The woman who died in room 312 telephoned my house the night of her death. She pleaded for assistance, gave her location, and begged for protection. That fact alone makes the matter inseparable from me." Kramer's face darkened. "You're saying she was your client?" "She attempted to be," Wolfe replied. "Her reticence and her haste prevented formal engagement. Nevertheless, by the simplest measure of conscience, I am involved." Kramer spat the cigar stub into the ashtray on my desk, where it landed with a dull thud. "Conscience," he said, voice dripping acid. "That's a laugh. Since when has Nero Wolfe been guided by conscience?" Wolfe's lips curved in something resembling amusement. "Since always, Inspector. But I assure you my conscience is not fashioned to your liking." "Then hear this." Kramer's finger stabbed the air. "This case is ours. We've got our theories, we've got men working it, and the last thing I need is you turning witnesses sideways with your blasted questions. Stay out, or I'll have you cited for obstruction." Wolfe did not flinch. "You may. Yet it would be ill-advised. The press already knows the girl called here. If I were dragged to headquarters for silence, you would answer for it tomorrow in every column of every sheet. You would be forced to explain why Nero Wolfe, approached by the victim, was denied the liberty to speak." Kramer's shoulders heaved once. He shot me a glare, then returned to Wolfe. "So, you plan to meddle? You'll run your private show while I try to hold the department together." Wolfe spread his fingers over the chair arm. "I plan nothing. I will not obstruct. I will not assist, unless—" He paused, letting the silence settle like dust. "Unless compelled by conscience. Should I learn that the truth is being discarded in favor of convenience, I will speak. Until then, I remain as you see me, sedentary." Kramer exhaled through his teeth. The office held only the sound of the wall clock ticking its approval. He turned abruptly, paced 2 steps, and whirled back. "You think you can sit there and wait while we do the work. But if I find one shred of evidence that you're hiding information, Wolfe, so help me, I'll have you dragged out of that chair by a squad." "That would be impressive," Wolfe murmured. "Bring stout men. The chair is heavy." My lips twitched, but I kept it in check. Kramer's glare could blister paint. He snatched his hat from under his arm, jammed it on, and strode for the door. At the threshold, he turned once more. "I'm warning you. Stay out." The door slammed behind him with a report that rattled the glass panes. The silence afterward was thick. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes again, and drew in a long breath as though nothing more significant than a gust of wind had passed through. I crossed to the desk, nudged the cigar stub into the tray with a pencil, and looked at him. "You enjoy needling him, don't you?" Wolfe's eyelids fluttered open. Enjoyment is irrelevant. He must be reminded that threats do not alter facts. Facts being that the girl called here, and that we're in it whether you like it or not. He grunted. "Correct. The problem now, Archie, is not our inclusion, but our measure. We must determine how deeply we tread. That will depend on what you bring me. Kramer has warned us away." "Very well. But he cannot forbid conscience." He lifted his glass of beer, took a measured sip, and replaced it with deliberate care. "Attend to your duties. Continue where you began, but tread lightly. I have no desire to share a cell with Inspector Kramer." "Don't worry," I said. "If you ever land in one, I'll bring a cushion for the chair." He closed his eyes once more. The conversation was over. The case was not. The Red Lantern's lobby had settled into its usual sluggish rhythm by the time I walked in. The fog outside had begun to lift, letting weak sunlight spill through the glass doors, but the inside still carried its gloom. A porter leaned half asleep against a wall, and the desk clerk kept his eyes fixed on his register with all the fervour of a man hoping not to see me. I gave him a nod, but didn't bother with conversation. My interest wasn't at the desk. It was 3 floors up, in a room that had already been stripped of its most vital occupant and left to silence. The elevator groaned its way up, and I stepped out into the 3rd-floor corridor. The carpet was still trodden flat from policemen's shoes, but the air smelled fresher than yesterday, a sign that windows had been opened and shut again, as though the hotel hoped to air out the memory of death. Room 312 stood open. Inside, the furniture had been set back into polite positions, the bed made with military corners, and the handbag removed. What drew me was not the neatness but the fireplace at the far wall. It was the only piece of the room that looked tampered with. The grate had been cleaned too thoroughly, not just swept, but scrubbed as if someone feared the persistence of ash. I crouched near it. The hearth was faintly warm, though no fire had burned there this morning. A broom leaned nearby, bristles blackened. Whoever had cleaned it had done so recently. I reached down and sifted lightly among the few grains left behind. Most had been carried off, but the work had not been perfect. Against the dark iron, a pale corner of paper clung, warped from heat but not fully consumed. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. I turned as the chambermaid from before appeared, hands clutched in front of her apron. She froze when she saw me kneeling by the grate. "Good morning," I said lightly. "The fireplace seems unusually tidy for a hotel." Her lips parted, then closed again. She shifted from foot to foot. "I was told to clean it." "By whom?" Her eyes flicked down the hall, then back. "Mr. Griscom." "The lawyer?" She nodded quickly. "He said it was nothing. He gave me $5 to burn the paper and sweep it away." I straightened slowly, holding her gaze. "And you did as he asked?" "Yes, sir. I was afraid not to." She wrung her hands. "He said it was just trash." Trash that burns with such urgency it must be cleared before police see it. Her throat worked, but she said nothing. I bent again and pried the scrap free. The edges were brittle, the centre blurred, but faint words remained. I held it to the light from the window. 3 legible phrases emerged. "Deliver at dawn." Doc 17, I folded the scrap carefully into my notebook. Evidence is fragile, especially when it's half smoke. "Listen," I told her. "You've done enough already. Don't speak of this to anyone else for now. If Griscom comes back, you tell him you obeyed him fully. Leave the rest to me." She looked relieved, gave a nervous curtsy, and hurried off down the corridor. I stayed a moment longer, gazing at the grate. $5 bought obedience, but not perfection. Griscom had wanted that note gone. That meant the words mattered. Doc 17, deliver at dawn. A rendezvous, a shipment, something tangible. And a woman had died because she knew too much about it. I left the room, descended the creaking elevator, and passed the lobby without sparing the desk clerk another glance. Outside, the city had gathered its energy again. Trucks rumbled past, horns blared, and the fog had dwindled into a faint haze that hung above the avenues. I hailed a cab and gave the driver West 35th Street. Back at the brownstone, Fritz answered the bell. He didn't speak as usual, but his eyes flicked to my pocket as though he sensed I carried something not meant for kitchens. I moved straight to the office. Wolfe was in his chair, post-lunch beer before him, glass already misted from chill. He glanced up with a slight raise of the brow. "You've found something," he said, not as question but as statement. "I have." I placed the notebook on his desk, opened it, and revealed the scrap. He leaned forward, surprisingly nimble when evidence beckoned, and peered at the faded words. He read them aloud softly. "Deliver at dawn. Dock 17. He sat back, steepling his fingers. So, a woman dead for knowledge of cargo. Griscom paid the maid $5 to burn it. She admitted it freely. Phooey, he must be clumsy to leave even a remnant. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Dock 17, that is along the Hudson, a berth for freighters. Deliveries at dawn suggest contraband, not cloth. Then the lady walked into something heavier than romance. He grunted. Heavier and fatal. You will pursue it, quietly. We must learn what was to be delivered and to whom. That will tell us who feared her knowledge. I slipped the notebook back into my pocket. And Kramer? Let Kramer bleat about robbery. We will deal with facts. He reached for his beer, sipped and allowed the faintest sigh of satisfaction. You see, Archie, evidence cannot be hidden with broom and coin. It clings, it whispers, and when gathered, it condemns. I leaned back in my chair, considering the words on the scrap. Dock 17, a number that would tug at the next thread. Wolfe had it right. The woman's death wasn't about stolen purses. It was about a cargo worth killing for. The office settled into silence, broken only by the faint clink as Wolfe set his glass down. Fritz passed in the hall, light-footed, preparing for dinner. Outside, Manhattan pressed on, indifferent. Inside, one more fragment had joined the puzzle. When Wolfe decides the world must move, he seldom moves with it. He issues an order, and the rest of us revolve accordingly. That afternoon, the order was clear. Saul Panzer would take himself to the Hudson, where Dock 17 sat under its usual pall of fog and smoke, and learn why a woman had died for a line on burnt paper. Wolfe delivered the command from his chair, heavy as a throne, voice flat as always. Saul will go. He is less obtrusive than you, Archie, and more resourceful than most policemen. You will wait. That was all. Saul nodded, adjusted his old cap, and left without waste. Waiting is an art Wolfe has mastered, and I endure. The hours passed with the muted clatter of Fritz in the kitchen and Wolfe's low rumble of disapproval directed at a book of Persian poetry. I occupied myself with the Gazette, cross-checking shipping notices against names that had become too familiar. Vance, Griscom, Kendall, and Rita Dane. The fog thickened outside, horn blasts carrying across the avenues, while inside the office the lamplight gave everything its amber sheen. At last, a little after 7, Saul returned. He entered as he always did, quietly, hat in hand, expression unreadable. He settled into one of the red chairs without waiting for Wolfe's invitation, and I closed my notebook, knowing he was ready to report. Wolfe opened his eyes, slow and deliberate. "Well?" Saul set the cap on his knee and began in his plain voice. Dock 17 was busy near dusk. Crates unloaded from a freighter tied under Panamanian colours. Markings were clear. Vance Import Company. Big stenciled letters, black on grey boards. There were guards, 2 or 3, keeping watch, tough types. When I asked casual questions, they scattered quick like I'd asked about their mothers. That told me enough. They were under instructions to avoid notice. I leaned forward. Vance's company, in person. Saul nodded once. Yes, Henry Vance himself, standing near the crane. He wasn't alone. Griscom was there too. They kept to one side, whispering together, close. Looked like men planning a funeral, not business. Wolfe's brows lifted. Griscom, in attendance with Vance at Dock 17, Saul continued. I stayed low. watched from a stack of lumber. One detail stood out. By the warehouse door hung an overcoat. Grey wool, heavy, muddy at the hem, looked as if it had seen rough ground. I didn't see the owner, but the coat was placed like property of someone in authority. Nobody touched it. That pricked my memory, sharp. The bellboy's words about a man in a grey overcoat whispering with the victim. Now Saul had seen one, fresh with mud, hanging near Vance's cargo. Saul spread his hands, finished. That's it. I pulled back before anyone got too curious. The office fell into silence. Wolfe's eyes closed, and he let the information settle into his mind like wine breathed before pouring. His lips moved once, muttering, "A woman dead for knowledge of cargo," as if confirming his earlier deduction. He opened his eyes again, gaze on me. "Well, Archie, the boy's testimony of a grey overcoat is substantiated. Vance imports, Griscom counsels. The link to the dead woman is no longer tenuous." "Plenty tenuous, if you ask Kramer," I said. "He'll wave it off as dockside chatter." Wolfe grunted. "Kramer is hobbled by haste. He seeks resolution before revelation. We shall proceed otherwise." I turned to Saul. "You're certain about Griscom whispering with Vance?" "Certain," he said simply. "Close together, heads bent, voices low. They didn't wish ears." "Then we've got a lawyer and an importer keeping company with crates worth guarding, a murdered woman and a burnt note leading straight to that dock." I sat back, whistling softly. "That's not coincidence, that's design." Wolfe closed his eyes again, fingers steepled. "Coincidence is the refuge of fools. We deal in motive. What was to be delivered? Contraband, I surmise. And she knew. Therefore she perished." Saul rose, collected his cap, and gave a small nod. "You'll want me to keep watching." "Yes," Wolfe said, eyes still shut. "Discretion is your métier. Continue. Report what moves, who arrives, what is whispered. We shall not intrude until the moment ripens." Saul left as quietly as he had come, the door shut behind him with the softest click. The room held its stillness once more. Wolfe reached for his glass of beer, lifted it, and took a measured sip, as if the matter of smuggled cargo and strangled women could be digested alongside malt and hops. He set it down, wiped his lips with a square of linen, and muttered, "Satisfied." I poured myself a glass of milk and leaned against the desk. "So, the bellboy wasn't seeing ghosts. The grey overcoat's real and it's muddy. Vance and Griscom are in it up to their ears. What now?" "What now, Archie," Wolfe said, eyes opening just enough to regard me, "is that we wait for the cargo to betray its purpose. Goods speak when men do not. And men, especially importers and lawyers, cannot silence goods indefinitely." The lamplight cast his face into half-shadow, his eyes glinting with something between disdain and hunger. Hunger for the truth, not for the meal that Fritz was surely preparing below. I drank my milk in silence, aware that one more piece of the puzzle had slotted into place. The woman who called us had feared death. Doc 17 had given her reason, and Wolfe, heavy in his chair, had begun to see the pattern tightening. Rita opened before my second knock, eyes already sharp. "If he sent you, I'm not talking," she said. "Griscom didn't send me," I told her, "but he left his mark on your wrist." She flinched, tugged her sleeve lower, then stepped back from the door. "Close it," she whispered. The room bore the stamp of transience. Dresses draped on chairs, powder on the bureau, an ashtray crowded with lipstick-marked butts. She waved me to the chair by the dresser and perched on the bed herself, legs crossed. "Make it quick," she said. "I've got rehearsal." "That's a shame," I said, because I was hoping for conversation, not chorus lines. Her mouth twitched despite herself. "All right. What do you want?" "The truth," I said, "about last night. She came to you." Rita's eyes darted away, then back. "Who told you that?" "Call it intuition. And the look you gave me yesterday, when you denied too quickly." She sighed, shoulders dropping. "Fine. She did come, knocked late, said she was desperate, wanted to know how to disappear, not from the stage, from life, said someone was after her." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. I don't know about vanishing. I'm lucky if I can make rent. I told her to lie down, get some sleep. She didn't stay, just wrung her hands, said thank you and left. That's it." Her words came fast, rehearsed, but her eyes betrayed the tremor underneath. I leaned forward. She didn't leave anything with you? No. Rita reached for a cigarette, then thought better and set the case down again. As she moved, the sleeve of her robe slipped back. For a second I saw the mark, a dark bruise circling her wrist, fresh enough to speak of last night. She yanked the sleeve down, too late. "Rita," I said quietly, "who grabbed you?" She looked at me, wide-eyed, caught between lie and confession. Her lips trembled. "It wasn't her, it was Griscom." I kept my tone calm. "The lawyer?" "Yes." She pressed the sleeve tighter. "He came after she left, said she'd handed me something, an envelope. I told him no. He didn't believe me. He grabbed my wrist, tried to force me to say where it was. I screamed. He hushed me, shoved money at me, told me to keep quiet. Then he left. I didn't sleep after that." "Did she leave you the envelope?" Rita swallowed. "Yes. Small, brown, sealed. She pressed it into my hand, said I'd be safer holding it than she would. I didn't want it, but she begged. Then Griscom came. I still have it." She crossed to the dresser, opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a flat envelope, edges crumpled. She held it a moment, then thrust it at me. "Take it. I don't want any part." I accepted it, slipping it into my inside pocket without a glance. "You've done enough. If Griscom asks, tell him nothing. If he presses again, shout loud. But for now, you've helped more than you know." She sagged onto the bed, face pale. She was so scared. I thought maybe she was just imagining things. But now she's dead. And he wanted that envelope. I wish I'd never opened the door. I stood. "Opening the door may have saved more than you realize. Keep your chin up, Rita. You've given me something solid." Her laugh was hollow. "Solid? It feels like dynamite." I tipped my hat, left her to her smoke and shadows, and carried the envelope down the corridor. The hotel air felt heavier now, as though the walls had absorbed her confession. By the time I reached the brownstone, night had closed in. The lamps in the office glowed warm against the fog outside. Wolfe was in his chair, book-balanced, beer within reach. He looked up as I entered. "Well?" I drew the envelope from my coat and laid it on his desk. The chorus girl cracked. The victim visited her room, asked how to disappear, left this in her care. Griscom came later, tried to wrestle it from her, left her with a bruise for thanks. She refused. Now it's ours. Wolfe set the book aside, studied the envelope without touching it. His eyes narrowed. "And thus, Archie, the noose tightens. Griscom seeks it. The woman died for it. And now we possess it." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Contraband, documents, accounts, whatever lies inside, it binds death to cargo. Very well. We proceed." I set the envelope on Wolfe's desk as if it might hiss or explode. It was the size of an ordinary letter, but carried a weight out of proportion to its paper. Rita Dane had parted with it as if it were a curse she could no longer shoulder, and I wasn't thrilled about inheriting it. Wolfe regarded it without touching, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You examined it?" "Not yet. I thought you'd want first honours." "Phooey, honours are irrelevant. The fact is what matters." He extended a hand, large and deliberate, and drew the envelope closer. With a paper knife, he slit the top and withdrew the contents. A stack of folded sheets emerged. Shipping manifests, customs declarations, and typewritten invoices stamped and initialed in bureaucratic fashion. Wolfe spread them across the blotter, his heavy fingers smoothing each corner. He bent forward, lips pursed, scanning with the slow precision that would have driven a less patient man to madness. I circled behind him and read over his shoulder. The forms listed consignments of textiles, machinery, and chemicals, but alongside the typed entries were faint erasures and overwritten numbers, subtle enough to escape a casual glance but glaring to trained eyes. Ports of origin had been altered, weights adjusted, dates shifted. One manifest bore the stamp of Vance Import Company in bold ink. "Well," I said, "that ties it neat. Vance isn't just moving cloth." Wolfe grunted. "Indeed. Forgery of entries, false declarations of cargo, reweighting. The pattern suggests contraband." He tapped one finger against the page. "Narcotics, perhaps, concealed within legitimate freight." "And she had this," I said. "That's why Griscom wanted it back." "That is why she is dead," Wolfe corrected. "She blundered into knowledge that cost her life. Men kill for profit, Archie. Rarely for honour, never for romance. Profit alone breeds this efficiency. I folded my arms, uneasy. Then we're holding the very thing men would kill to recover. That doesn't put us in the safest position. His eyes flicked up at me. Safety is a chimera. Responsibility is real. The woman made herself my client when she telephoned this house. By extension, her evidence is ours to preserve. We will not return it to Griscom, nor surrender it to Kramer until the proper moment. For now, it remains here. He gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and slid them into a manila folder. Rising with effort, he crossed to the wall safe behind the globe. I watched him dial the combination with his thick fingers, swing the door wide, and place the folder inside. He shut it with a click that echoed faintly. "There," he said, resuming his chair. "Inviolate," I exhaled. "Inviolate until someone tries breaking in." "No one will break in. This house is secure. Fritz guards his kitchen like a fortress, and you guard the door like a sentry." "Still, I'd rather not have visitors pounding for what's in that safe. We're already in deeper than usual. She's dead. Griscom's desperate. Vance has his cargo, and now we're sitting on proof. That's the kind of combination that makes people reckless." Wolfe's eyes closed. "Then let them be reckless. We will not. Recklessness is the enemy of reason." I went to the window. Fog still pressed against the glass, the city muffled, horns distant. Somewhere on the Hudson, more crates were stacked with Vance's name, guarded by men who scattered when questioned. And in our safe lay the papers that proved it all. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had painted a target on our backs. Turning, I found Wolfe already lifting his glass of beer, savouring the first sip as if nothing had shifted. That was his way. But for me, the weight of the envelope lingered, heavy as guilt. "Archie," Wolfe said quietly, "you must understand. We cannot discard it. The integrity of evidence is paramount. Without it, we are reduced to conjecture. With it, we may compel truth." "I understand," I said, though my gut protested. "But it means we're keeping dynamite in the parlour." "Then tread lightly," he said. "Do not boast of it. Do not flaunt it. Let the enemy suspect nothing. Only then will they expose themselves." The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Fritz's movement sounded below, preparing dinner in his ordered rhythm. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and began sketching the chain of names. The woman in 312, Rita Dane, Griscom, Vance, Doc 17. At the centre, a set of forged forms hidden too long. The brownstone was quiet, but beneath that quiet the case had shifted. We no longer chased shadows. We held substance, and substance draws pursuit. I stepped back, because when Kramer has that look, the best you can do is let him barrel through. He stomped into the hall, hat low over his forehead, and didn't wait for ceremony. I followed him to the office, shut the door behind us, and took my place near the desk. Wolfe did not rise. He never did. He remained in the yellow chair, massive, hands folded across his vest, gaze fixed as if watching a particularly dull insect crawl across the ceiling. "Inspector," Wolfe said evenly, "you honour me with another visit, twice in 1 week. Is this a raid?" "Don't tempt me," Kramer snapped. He yanked the cigar from his mouth, jabbed it in Wolfe's direction, and planted himself in front of the desk. "I know you've got it." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Have what, pray?" "Don't play coy. An envelope. Papers. They belong to the girl at the Red Lantern. Witnesses put Goodwin nosing around, and now the talk is you're sitting on something. Hand it over." Wolfe's fingers tightened once across his vest, then relaxed. "Ah, that." He exhaled slowly. "No." Kramer's jaw bunched. "You refuse?" "Correct." His fist slammed the desk, rattling the blotter. "Blast it, Wolfe. This is obstruction. That envelope is evidence. You can't hide it like a miser hoarding coins." Wolfe's eyelids drooped, unimpressed. "Inspector, control yourself. The young woman placed her call here the night she died. By the laws of decency, and by the traditions of my profession, she constituted herself my client. What she entrusted, by extension, belongs to that privilege. Until the moment arrives for its lawful disclosure, it remains inviolate." Kramer's face went red as brick. He turned toward me, jabbing the cigar again. "And you, Goodwin, did you fetch it? Did you put it in his safe?" I spread my hands. "Inspector, if Wolfe says it's inviolate, then it's inviolate. My job is to follow orders, and my orders are clear. Orders, Kramer spat the word. He rounded on Wolfe again. Privilege doesn't cover murder. That girl's dead. You're withholding papers that may name her killer. Wolfe's tone sharpened by a hair. You have your theories. You trumpet robbery. You will concoct suspects until one breaks. I, however, will not abet you in error. The papers remain here, where they cannot be altered, misplaced, or conveniently forgotten. That is my duty to my client. Kramer drew a breath that sounded like steam through pipes. Client? She never signed a contract with you. She sought me. She pleaded for protection. She delivered evidence, if not by hand, then by consequence. That suffices. Inspector, do not wrangle law with me. You will lose. The silence hung thick. Kramer's fists clenched, unclenched. He leaned forward, close enough that his breath stirred Wolfe's tie. If I learn you're using that evidence for your own game, I'll drag you downtown in cuffs. Privilege or no privilege, I'll have you answering under oath. For the first time that evening, Wolfe's lips twitched upward. Not a smile, never that, but the barest curl, his version of mirth. He rumbled, I look forward to watching you try. That did it. Kramer tore the cigar in half with his teeth, spat the mangled stub into the ashtray, and jammed his hat back on his head. You make me sick, he barked. Both of you. If justice slips because of your stubborn pride, the city will hear of it. He stormed to the door, flung it wide, and pounded down the hall. The slam of the front door rattled the frame, and the brownstone settled back into silence. I exhaled, leaned against the desk, and shook my head. You know, one day he might actually follow through and haul us both in. Then you'll have to sit in a chair less comfortable than that one. Wolfe closed his eyes. An intolerable prospect. Therefore we must avoid it. Archie, no further mention of the envelope outside this room. Let Kramer gnash his teeth. Facts cannot be conjured by tantrum. I dropped into my chair, reached for the remains of my sandwich, and found it limp. Fine by me, but I hope Fritz keeps the safe stocked with something stronger than steel, because Griscom and Vance won't stop at tantrums. Wolfe opened one eye. Then be vigilant. Danger cannot be removed, but it can be anticipated. And when it comes, we shall be ready. He closed the eye again, as if nothing had passed, and reached lazily for the bell to summon Fritz for dinner. The Gazette hit the stoop before breakfast, but it might as well have been a trumpet blast outside the brownstone. I brought it in, spread it across my desk, and let the headline glare at me in type so large it might have been carved on a monument. Jewelry salesman arrested in lantern murder. Stolen gems found in luggage. The photograph beneath showed Morris Kendall, coat collar up, jaw clenched, being led from the Red Lantern by two burly detectives. The caption assured the public that the case was neatly wrapped, thanks to diligent police work. I glanced toward Wolfe's chair. He was in it, of course, fresh from the orchids, head bent over his breakfast beer. His eyes shifted to me, then to the paper. "Read it," he commanded. I did. The article described how police, acting on anonymous information, searched Kendall's room and discovered a velvet pouch of unset gems tucked inside his valise. The stones matched pieces reported missing from an uptown wholesaler earlier in the month. Kramer had given a statement. Case closed. The motive was simple robbery. The victim resisted. Kendall silenced her. When I finished, Wolfe's fist came down on the chair arm with a thud that rattled the ashtray. Idiocy. His voice filled the office like a cannon report. Crass, puerile idiocy. I set the paper aside. You don't buy it. Buy it? He sat forward, bulk straining the chair. I would not buy it if it were hawked for pennies on a curb. A salesman of trinkets travelling with samples and contracts suddenly carries stolen gems? Absurd. The stones were planted. I nodded. I thought you'd say that. And Saul backs you. He told me he saw a man slip into Kendall's room this morning before the arrest. Used a key. Wasn't in long. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, gleaming with cold fury. Precisely. They needed a goat. The simplest of strategies. Take an innocent, burden him with the sin, and declare triumph. Meanwhile, the true commerce continues, unmolested. I leaned against the desk. Kramer won't hear it. He's already given the Gazette his victory speech. Kramer hears only what affirms him, Wolfe said acidly. He trumpets robbery, and now he has his thief. The city is appeased, the mayor nods, the department puffs its chest, and the woman in 312 is forgotten, Her true killer's free to profit. He reached for his glass, drained half in one swallow and set it down hard. Archie, this is intolerable. I kept my voice even. Then we prove Kendall's clean. Saul says the man with the key left no trace, but that doesn't mean we can't sniff him out. Sniff, yes, Wolfe muttered. Snarl if needed. But carefully. We hold evidence that ties Vance's company to forgery and cargo. If they sense we are too close, their desperation may exceed prudence. The office fell into silence, broken only by the clock's tick. I pictured Kendall, nervous, quick-handed, the Polish rag trembling when I questioned him in the lobby. A man used to selling rings and necklaces, not to strangling women. Now he sat in a cell while the true culprits toasted their cleverness. Poor devil, Wolfe murmured, echoing my thought. He is no saint, but he is no murderer. He is an offering, placed on an altar to appease outrage. I crossed to the window. Outside, the fog had thinned, leaving Manhattan stark in pale sunlight. Delivery trucks rattled down the avenue, horns called, the city indifferent to one more man's fate. I turned back. So, what's the move? Sit while Kramer parades his goat? Wolfe's eyes snapped open. No, we proceed. You will confirm Saul's sighting, who entered Kendall's room, when and how. Speak to the staff, the boy, the maid. Establish the timeline. If possible, find the key used. Proof, Archie. Nothing less. Understood, I said. Wolfe's lips thinned, then curved again into that faint curl that stood in for laughter. They think me dormant, complacent. They forget that while Nero Wolfe sits, Archie Goodwin moves. Very well. Let them bask in their triumph. We shall strip it from them. He reached for the bell cord, tugged once. Fritz appeared silently in the doorway, his apron immaculate. Lunch at 1, Wolfe instructed, light but substantial. Fritz bowed and retreated. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled once more, eyes already closing. Archie, he said softly, they have chosen their goat. We must show them the shepherd. I picked up the Gazette again, folded it with care and slid it into the file. The headline still proclaimed victory. But in Wolfe's office, under the lamplight and the steady tick of the clock, victory was nothing more than another false trail waiting to be torn apart. The day was spent pulling strands that refused at first to knot. I left the brownstone in the morning with Wolfe's command in my ear, gather, all of it, and set about chasing leads. By dusk my notebook was fat with contradictions, and the case had wound itself around me like barbed wire. First stop had been a visit to a man in Lower Manhattan who keeps track of bankruptcies for a living. For the price of a steak dinner, he let me glance at his files. Henry Vance, our respectable importer, was running on fumes. His accounts were stretched, payments delayed, creditors snapping at his heels. Shipments that should have padded his fortune had gone missing in customs fog, and more than one bank had quietly refused his notes. On paper, he was solvent. In truth, he was balancing on air. Next came a chat with a clerk in the municipal court, one who owed me a favour. Paul Griscom, attorney at law, had filed 6 separate injunctions in the past 2 months on behalf of Vance Import Company, stalling creditors and choking off investigations. The man wasn't merely Vance's lawyer, he was puppeteer, tugging strings to keep the company from collapse. I could almost picture Griscom whispering in Vance's ear on the dock, reminding him which lie to repeat and which truth to bury. By noon I had the pieces stacked in my head. Vance, desperate, broke, clinging to his reputation. Griscom, crafty, ruthless, using legal manoeuvres to keep the wolves from the door. Rita Dane, frightened, hiding bruises that told of Griscom's eagerness to claim the dead woman's envelope. Kendall, hapless, framed with stolen gems and now paraded through the papers as the culprit. The threads lay scattered, but each carried tension. All it needed was Wolfe to tie them. I returned to the brownstone with my notes. Fritz let me in, silent as always, the faint aroma of roasting duck trailing behind him. Wolfe was in the office, planted in his chair, eyes closed, lips pressed into a flat line. I delivered the findings one by one, from Vance's sinking fortunes to Griscom's stranglehold. He listened, said nothing, only raised a hand once to halt me while he considered a detail. When I finished, he gave a single grunt and rose. That alone startled me. Wolfe does not rise in the middle of the day without cause. He crossed to the bookshelves, hands clasped behind him, and began to pace. The floorboards creaked under his bulk as he moved back and forth, each turn precise, deliberate. I stayed quiet. Wolfe pacing is like a solar eclipse. You witness it rarely, and only a fool interrupts. I busied myself at the desk, making copies of my notes, watching him from the corner of my eye. His lips moved occasionally, forming words I could not catch, his brow furrowed deeper with every circuit. The office air grew thick with his silence, broken only by the scrape of his shoes and the distant clink of Fritz setting the dining room. Hours passed. I fetched myself milk and a sandwich from the kitchen, returned, and found him still pacing. The clock struck 6, then 7. Wolfe neither paused nor spoke. My patience frayed, but I held my tongue. He was working, not with his hands, but with that colossal engine inside his skull. At last, near 8, Fritz entered softly to announce dinner. Wolfe stopped mid-stride, exhaled as though surfacing from deep water, and moved to the table. He lowered himself with a sigh, adjusted his napkin, and waited. Fritz served roast duck, potatoes, and spinach, with a chilled beer for Wolfe and milk for me. We ate in silence, the only sound the silverware and the tick of the mantel clock. Wolfe set down his fork, leaned back, and dabbed his lips with a square of linen. He said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence weigh as heavily as his bulk. At last he gave a grunt, pushed his plate aside, and muttered, "We have reached the hinge." He did not explain further, only lifted his glass and drank. I sat back, heart thudding. The hours of silence, the pacing, the weight of thought, they had led to this. The threads were pulled tight, and Wolfe had chosen his culprit. Now, all that remained was the reckoning. I don't like chasing phantoms, but paper leaves footprints if you know where ink dries. The Red Lantern's desk clerk had spent yesterday cultivating ignorance. Today I brought fertilizer. A 10-spot and a reminder that perjury makes a poor pillow did the trick. He stopped polishing his spectacles, glanced at the wall clock, and produced a thin book from under the counter, a ledger bound in cracked brown cloth. "Service pass keys," he said, low. "Sign-outs. We keep it for repairs, emergencies, not for guests." "Of course," I told him, and turned the pages like a parish boy handling scripture. Names bent in nervous script across the columns, chambermaids, a handyman, once a fire inspector, then a neat entry, midnight -10, right where the ink still had a sheen, H. Vance. The reason line read stuck window, 312. The clerk licked his lips. He said the sash jammed, asked for the key, brought it back 10 minutes later. 10, I said, and shut the book. 10 minutes to unlock a window that wasn't stuck and a throat that no longer drew air. I slid a card from my wallet and left it on the blotter. If you forget this conversation, forget it completely. That's safest. In the corridor, the elevator boy's cap sat at more of a tilt than a uniform manual would approve. He recognized me and tried a grin that didn't stick. I steered him over by the machine room where the gears made a steady hum. "That grey overcoat you saw," I said. "You remember the check number from the cloakroom?" He surprised himself by nodding. 17. I remember because it matched the dock number on those crates. 17, what the other man was talking about. He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. "Good memory," I told him. "Keep it clean." I peeled a bill from my roll and sent him back to the crank. Down in the basement I found the handyman, a man built out of rope and sawdust, oil in the lines of his hands. He'd been repairing a hinge with a utility knife that looked like it had earned a pension. When I introduced myself, he shrugged, then jerked his chin at a board where keys hung in a pattern only he understood. "Windows on 3 don't stick," he said, before I could ask. "I planed 'em last week. Anyone told you otherwise is selling another story." Back on the street, I let the fog roll over me and added it up. A passkey ledger with H. Vance written neat as a wedding certificate, a cloakroom tag that married a grey overcoat to Doc 17, a handyman who took one look at a lie and called it by name. When facts fall into line, you don't ask them to dance out of it. Saul called from a nickel phone somewhere that echoed like a tin drum. "They shifted crates again," he said. "Same mark, Vance Import." And a foreman mentioned a lawyer sticking his nose in the bills of lading. He didn't have to say which lawyer. "You going to move it?" "Soon," I said, and hung up. I had a brownstone to get back to, and a man in a yellow chair to feed. Wolfe listened while I laid out the ledger, the tag, and the hinge that didn't stick. He closed his eyes and let the elements settle into their orbits. When he opened them, the glint behind the lid said gravity had done its work. "Vance wanted the passkey," he murmured. "Not Griscom. Griscom manipulates paper. Vance manipulates doors. Very well." He reached for his beer and lifted it with both hands, as if toasting inevitability. If it was inevitability, it wasn't the city's kind. It was Wolfe's, patient, fattened, and final. Wolfe stopped pacing at last, turned and lowered himself into the yellow chair with a sigh that carried weight enough to fill the room. He lifted one hand as though dismissing fog. "Enough," he said. "Assemble them. Vance, Griscom, Kendall if Kramer will release him, and Miss Dane. Saul will attend unseen. Truth divides the guilty better than rope." He reached for his beer, took a slow sip and shut his eyes. "The red chairs will do the rest." It wasn't all, not for me, but it was enough. When Wolfe says assemble, you wind the clock, set the room, and let the city walk into its own confession. An hour later, the red chairs had earned their keep. Denials cracked, timelines crossed, and Vance's dignity buckled under the weight of his own lies. But already the office was regaining its balance, lamplight steady, books unmoved, the faint tick of the mantel clock indifferent to murder and confession. Wolfe leaned back in the yellow chair, immense and calm, his eyes closed as though the evening had been nothing more than a passing inconvenience. For my part, I wasn't so easily soothed. The image of Vance shouting curses dragged away in Kramer's grip still rattled in my head. Murder doesn't leave a room as quickly as a man. I drifted to the window, looked out at the avenue, and saw headlights weaving through fog. The Red Lantern Hotel would be crowded tonight with reporters, bellboys answering the same questions, and guests whispering in corridors. But here, behind Wolfe's locked door, the storm had passed. The bell in the hall chimed once. Fritz entered, white apron immaculate, bearing a tray. He moved with the same quiet certainty he always did, whether serving luncheon in peacetime or dinner after revelations that ruined men. He placed a frosted glass before Wolfe, filled with golden beer, foam settling neatly to the rim. Another tray carried dishes that made me forget, for a moment, that the world outside existed at all. Pheasant in a wine sauce, potatoes roasted crisp, a salad of greens, and bread warm enough that steam rose when Fritz cut it. Wolfe opened his eyes at last, lifted the glass, and drank deeply. He set it down with a long exhale, almost content. "At peace," he muttered. Fritz inclined his head, retreated, and closed the door behind him. Silence returned, broken only by the clink of silverware as Wolfe took his first deliberate bite. I sat at my desk, poured myself milk from the pitcher Fritz had left, and tried to shake the restlessness that clung to me. The case was closed, tied as neatly as Wolfe ever tied one, but the air still carried the weight of what had been unearthed. Lies, bruises, planted gems, and one woman's fear realized in the worst way. Wolfe finished another mouthful, then spoke. "You are discontented." I looked at him. "I'm restless. You'd think after all that I'd feel relief. Instead, I keep hearing her voice on the line, begging for help. We didn't get there in time." "You would have me conjure time?" Wolfe asked evenly. "We are not gods, Archie. We are men. Men bound by chronology, by appetite, by patience." She reached out, but fate reached sooner. I shook my head. "Easy for you to sit and reason it out. I was the one who heard her voice crack on the wire. That sticks." His eyes softened a fraction. "It will pass. The truth is secured. That is our task." I let the words hang, then poured more milk and swallowed hard. The room smelled of roast and beer, but underneath, I still sensed smoke from that hotel fireplace where the note had burned. Wolfe finished his plate in silence, then leaned back, wiping his lips with a square of linen. "Justice is not always swift, Archie, but it is constant. The law stumbles, men deceive, but truth waits. We have shown it, and truth, once shown, remains." "Not much comfort for Kendall, sitting in a cell until Kramer sets him free," I said. "He will be freed," Wolfe replied. "Kramer may bluster, but he is not a fool. He has his murderer. He will not keep an innocent man caged longer than necessity." I rose, stretched, and paced the office. The red chairs stood empty now, silent witnesses to the clash of words that had stripped men bare. I suppose it is neatly tied. Vance dead to the world, Griscom next in line, Rita free to sing again, Kendall cleared. It's a full circle. Neat, Wolfe agreed, as neat as any knot tied with human cord may be. Fritz returned to clear plates and serve cheese. Wolfe accepted it without comment, slicing with meticulous care, while I perched on the edge of the desk. "You know," I said, "sometimes I think you enjoy this too much, watching them squirm in those chairs while you pin them like beetles." Wolfe grunted. "I do not enjoy it. I endure it. Truth requires labour. Labour requires method. Method requires confrontation. They lie, I expose. That is all." "Still," I said, "you nearly smiled when Kramer clamped the cuffs on Vance." His lips curved faintly. "Nearly. Satisfaction is not mirth. Do not confuse them." We fell into silence again. I finished my milk, poured another glass, and raised it toward him. "Here's to the red lantern," I said softly. "Extinguished." Wolfe lifted his beer, touched the rim with a nod, and drank. The toast lingered in the lamplight, simple and final. Outside, the city thundered on. Inside, in the quiet of the brownstone, justice had found its place at last, alongside dinner, beer, and the calm certainty of Nero Wolfe's appetite.